Welcome to this week's Concurrency Beer 30. I'm Nathan Lesnowski, Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer, and with me this week is Tyler Plesetz. Tyler is a technical architect with Concurrency's Identity and Communications Practice. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
What kind of beer are you having today, Tyler?
It's a Sierra Nevada Torpedo. It's an IPA.
Okay, how do you like it?
It's pretty good, yeah.
Okay, I'm having the same thing. And it's much better than the beer I had last week. Last week I had this Stella cider thing, and it was not so good. So this is much better than that.
No, I've never tried that one.
I'm glad to be back to an actual beer.
Yeah.
And this is your second time on Beer 30.
Yeah, it is.
You have been here to talk about careers before.
Yep, definitely.
And glad to have you here talking about technology.
And me too.
All right. So we are going to talk about a pretty important topic, and that is security today. You have been doing a fair amount of work in that space. Sometimes when you ask, is Concurrency a security company, or what is a security company, I think you get different questions, different answers to that question. When you think about the main threats that exist within the security space right now, what are the main areas that you're seeing customers impacted? Like, what are the main things they have to look out for from a high-level category standpoint?
I mean, definitely some of the top ones that you'll see that people are concerned about: phishing and ransomware. Those are really the big ones that are top of mind, that you constantly see in the news these days. And I think those are the ones that people are trying to protect themselves from the most.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like it's every 3 months that someone comes to Concurrency having been phished and then ransomware, that their entire environment's compromised, and like, can you help us?
Yep.
It seems like this reoccurring hamster wheel of this exact problem that keeps going through the industry. What about like targeted attacks? Are you seeing things like that? Where it's less to sort of spray and find organizations that we're going to ransom and try to get something out of them, but more like, I want something out of this specific organization, I'm going to go work really hard to get it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We see plenty of that where spoofing, really, where a malicious actor pretends to be somebody else, maybe an executive at a company, and they reach out to somebody maybe in finance or a different part of the company and try to obtain information, or even have them send money as them pretending to be somebody in the organization that they're not.
Oh yeah, like an assistant to the president or something like that, saying, can you send money to this particular organization? And they're like, yeah, sure, of course.
Yep.
Got it. Are you seeing that the way that they're taking advantage of those types of organizations through targeted attacks have a lot of similarity to the ransomware?
Not necessarily. The targeted attacks, it would be, like I said, a user pretending to be somebody else. And in the ransomware attacks, a lot of times, a user would be kind of tricked into accessing something that they thought was a realistic request, maybe accessing like a new document that they need to fill out some information for. And just by clicking on that, then without their knowledge, they just have something installed on their workstation or that gets onto the network. So it's a little bit different, but definitely both not good for the organization.
So talk me through the normal chain of events in a ransomware attack. Understanding that if we were to rank the threats, that probably exists at the top of the threat levels because it's happening everywhere. Talk me through how they typically get in. Maybe that's the start, which you just mentioned, and then how they move throughout the network to be able to take advantage of the organization.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, as they reach out to a user with a malicious email, they click on a link, or they go to a website, and they download a file that's associated with that website, or maybe it's even an attachment in an email, and that puts malicious software on their workstation. And by having that on their workstation, it can traverse the network through like a SMB share, or even it can pretend to be the user in other manners as well, and then it'll spread itself across the network, whether that's to other servers, other users, and by doing that, it can, there's a couple things that it can do, but a common one is that it encrypts files that the user needs, corporate files, and it requires them, if they want to unlock those files, it asks them to pay an amount of money.
Yeah. It seems like the more sophisticated ransomware situations may be a little bit slower acting. if I were to have someone get onto my workstation and it's a normal user account, I probably can't compromise a server because I don't have server admin rights or something. But it seems like some of the customers that we run into, not only have they had their desktop environments compromised, but a significant portion of their server environment has also been compromised. Can you talk a little bit about how a group wanting to ransomware an entire company like that would accomplish that level of compromise?
Yeah. If they know who they're targeting for the attack, that's one way to do it. If they know that it's a user that they're targeting that has admin level access to servers and other systems, if they target that user with their attack and they're able to be successful there, they can potentially traverse the network if the user has access at the time, if they're on the network, if they have that connection. They can gain access to servers if it's the same credentials. There's other methodologies too that in an attack they can, once they're on the network with any account, there's ways that users have been able to successfully pose as an admin by elevating their privileges within the network as well. And once that happens too, then they can get access to essentially whatever they want.
Is one of the biggest situations we're trying to address here really just the idea of what it means to be on the network? The idea of I am probably a 20-year-old idea that I'm on CorpNet so I can access other CorpNet things, and that makes me safe, it makes me an appropriate device to be communicating with, allowing for lateral movement, all that sort of stuff. What do you see as the transition that companies are going through to be able to address that issue? Is that one of the main issues?
Yeah, that's definitely an issue, and one of the things that the shift is towards right now is removing that as an option. So don't have your device be on CorpNet, and join your device directly to, in the case of Microsoft Azure AD, and you don't have connection to the network when you're at your corporate office. It's a separate network that doesn't have access to servers. It's essentially just a client network where your access is to the internet and maybe some peer-to-peer connection with your colleagues. But that's really all that it is. So if your workstation gets compromised, that malicious payload can't really get off of your workstation onto servers because it's not even on the same network.
Got it. So that's really taking it down the zero trust idea, right?
Absolutely.
My device shouldn't trust your device. It has no reason to trust your device.
Right.
What do you think about how that then gains access to applications? Is there a process that those applications are also segmented, and how do those applications get put in front of the user that needs to use them if they're not on the CorpNet?
So definitely Intune is a big component that allows for that for users. So you don't have to be joined to the network and have some server on the network that's pushing out your applications to allow you to use them. You can just join your device with Azure AD and be enrolled in Intune. And by doing that, depending on group membership or whatever it may be, you can have the applications that are relevant to you be deployed to your device, or you can have a self-service portal through the company portal with Intune that you can pick and choose the software that you need installed.
What about access to those applications though? I've used Intune to install the app, but what if I need to have connectivity to that application and happens to live on CorpNet? What would be the way for me to sort of traverse to get access to that?
Yeah, a really great way that I recommend now is using the Azure App Proxy. So if you have an application on-prem that might be a reason that you're keeping your devices connected to the corporate network, you can use the Azure App Proxy to make that corporate application available over the public internet with Azure AD as the authentication mechanism that's integrated with that application. So the user can sign into it as they would to the Microsoft Office 365 portal, but it's accessing their corporate application using the same credentials. So they don't need to have access to the actual server itself or to that network that it's locally sitting on.
Now you mentioned something really important there, which is the idea that the workstation is not joined to the corporate Windows Active Directory network. Active Directory is joined to the Azure AD. What are the differences in those two models in your mind?
So a big component that people in the traditional sense would use typical Azure or Active Directory joined workstations for is group policy. They use that to deploy settings to their devices and make sure they're configured the way that they want them to be. With Azure AD, you only talk to Microsoft's cloud, and you can configure different policies for your devices as well, but it's not in the sense of group policy. There's some options available for that, but really it's more templates that they make available with security baselines or configuration profiles that you can deploy to the device to secure it in a way that you want to without really relying on your policy.
Got it. So let's say that I have a workstation I'm using. It's Azure AD joined. It is not on the corp net, and I've been compromised in some way. I have an application or something I clicked on that's caused me to be compromised. How am I now better off? What is this doing for me?
Well, first of all, if your device is not connected to any other devices through the corporate network, it's isolated in that way where you're not going to also compromise the rest of your organization. And with using an Azure AD joined device that's separated from the network in combination with some of the other tools that are available like Defender ATP, Windows Information Protection, OneDrive for your data storage rather than local storage, you can protect your device and your data where even if you have a virus or some malicious software on your device, it can't even access some of that data. Or it would, there'd be other controls in place where you could lock down your user account automatically if something would happen on your account. So an example would be Microsoft Cloud App Security. If you had something malicious on your device that was trying to access your OneDrive data and it put a file in there that was a known ransomware file extension, Microsoft Cloud App Security can identify that and it can automatically lock out your account so that no further action can be taken.
Got it. So that really tells me that, almost taking a pause here for a second and saying, holy cow, just the idea that if you're moving your workstation to an Azure AD joined machine, it's on a guest network, its ability to be then isolated from the other workstations is a major mitigator for lateral movement for ransomware.
Yep.
And probably one of the best things an organization can do to mitigate that sort of attack.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then you mentioned something that's even better, which is, all right, now this device has been compromised. We have to remember that that device has an identity that's being used that could be compromised along with it. And some of the other services that are tied into that device have interrelationships that are watching out for me and for the identity that I use and for that information that I'm protecting. Can you kind of continue forward with that breakdown for us on, if I still have that device that's been compromised, I may not be laterally moving, what are the other protections that may be in place that I can take advantage of to keep that actor from compromising things further up the chain?
Sure. So I'll start with something on the local device itself. I mentioned previously Windows Information Protection. What that can allow you to do is it segments corporate data versus personal data on the device. So it puts local encryption on your documents that are identified as corporate. So an example would be your OneDrive location. So if you had malicious software on your device and you had Windows Information Protection protecting you, that malicious software wouldn't even be able to access that corporate data because it's encrypted where it can only be opened by approved corporate applications. So the Office suite and other applications that you would choose. And going further along with that, if you wanted to protect outside of just the local device, if you wanted to make sure that nothing else can happen really on behalf of your user account, with Defender ATP enabled on a device, if something is detected, okay, this device is infected with malware, it can adjust the risk score on your authentication into that device and the device itself, and that can be used together with other Azure AD services to say, okay, this device is at a higher risk score. We're going to lock it out so that this user can't access our other cloud integrated services from this device because it's labeled as a high risk. So the user wouldn't even be able to access those corporate services anymore.
Got it. And that might even then relate into the cloud applications you use as well, right? Because that risk score is indicating that it may not just be like Office 365 and OneDrive and things like that, but it might be Salesforce or Workday or something else.
Yeah, any other cloud services that you'd have integrated. It would be, examples just like you listed, Salesforce, Workday, Box if you use that for file storage.
You mentioned the idea that Windows Information Protection can help me mitigate a file that's usually used by something like Word from being accessed or modified by some kind of malware or something that's trying to do something for it. Tell me a little bit about like what that really means. Like, does that prevent it from being ransomware, or is it more kind of ensuring it isn't maliciously modified in some way?
So really, it can't be, with Windows Information Protection, protecting a file, whatever file extension that may be.
Yeah.
It can't be accessed or modified by anything that you don't specify as a trusted corporate location or application. So if something on the device was attempting to open it and it wasn't in your list of applications, let's say the malicious software, let me go back. If the malicious software has a name, whatever it's called, and you don't necessarily see what that is, but if that software isn't listed in what you specify as, these are my corporate applications, this is the list of applications that I'm going to access my corporate data on.
Yeah.
There's no way that that malicious software can open or do anything with the files that you have that are listed as corporate files.
Got it. You mentioned Defender ATP briefly. Understanding that Defender ATP both runs as a malware detection as well as more kind of a behavioral engine, how does it relate to other things happening within the ecosystem, like the broader ecosystem, maybe even things outside of my organization? Say your device is compromised, it has a file that it finds to be malicious. Does my device take advantage of that? And then do I take advantage of other organizations that have found malicious stuff happening that could possibly benefit me, or are we all dependent?
No, absolutely. It all works together. So Defender ATP, it essentially keeps track of everything that's going on from what it learns from different organizations that are using that service. And it helps each individual organization that uses Defender ATP benefit from that. So when somebody gets compromised, Defender ATP service learns about it, and it helps other organizations not fall to the same fate of that same level of compromise. So for example, if a security flaw for a piece of software at the operating system level is known, or a specific attack vector is realized and Defender ATP becomes aware of it, it will light up in the admin center for Defender ATP for each organization that relates to that, saying this is a security risk on each of your devices, and it can adjust the risk score for those devices until that flaw is resolved, whether that's through a software update or an operating system upgrade. And by doing that, adjusting the risk score, it goes back to what I mentioned before. If action's not taken to resolve that risk that's known, it can lock out the device where you can't access corporate data until you resolve this issue.
Got it. How do you see things like passwordless and multi-factor auth and so on kind of fitting into this overall security picture?
It helps a lot, where what we've been talking about previously was how do you protect the device and the data on the device. But with passwordless, it's really how do you protect the user identity? How do you make sure that they are who they say they are when they're authenticating to something? And passwordless is a really great way to do that. It allows you to sign in using other mechanisms where you don't have to remember a password. And remembering a password is one of the most annoying things you have to do, especially if it's something where you're required to reset it every 30 days and then you get lazy because you don't want to have to keep remembering something new. So really the strategy now is you don't even have to really set an expiration policy on your password if you're using a strong second factor, multi-factor authentication, like passwordless authentication through the Authenticator app, where you enter your username, you get prompted on your phone for a number that matches the authentication prompt, and then you're signed in with a code on your device or like a biometric as well. Also using what's now a public preview in Azure AD is you can use 502 security keys. So you can use a USB security key to plug into your device, authenticate with a PIN or biometric, and sign into your account again without ever having to enter a password. And also the popular one is Windows Hello. So you can sign into your supported Windows device with your face or biometrics or PIN, and those bits of information with Windows Hello are local to the device. So you don't have to have a password where if somebody gets your password, they can sign in any service as you, and they don't have to worry about anything else. If somebody could get your password and they still need either biometrics or PIN or some other factor to be able to actually take any action as you and gain access to a service.
I gotta say, I love using Windows Hello. Like the whole idea of walking up to my computer and having it know who I am and just have it work is beautiful.
It's amazing, and it's really, really fast. You
Yeah.
can just open up your laptop
Boom.
from being closed, and before you even can blink, you're logged in.
And then you go back to like having to authenticate with a password again, and you're like, this is so archaic. Like I'm typing this password.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah.
And one that I've really grown to like is using, they call it phone sign-in with the Authenticator app. That allows you to, without having, you don't ever have to enter your password in that fashion. So you enter your username, it provides you with a number, you enter the matching number into the Authenticator app, and you're signed in. Where that takes away the kind of annoyance of you have to enter your username and password anyway, and then you have to do the second thing, and
Yeah.
it takes a lot of extra time, and people get annoyed by that. This is just really quick. You type in your username, you match it up on your phone, and you're signed in. And even with certain smartwatches, you can do your authentication from that as well. So it's a quick and easy way to have a secure login to your devices.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so we've talked about, inside the context of the idea of ransomware, we've talked about the idea of getting devices off the network, isolating them so they can't talk to each other or talk to anything important unless we let it. We talked about the idea of an identity authenticating you onto that device, so we have something we know, we have something we have that authenticates us. We have a device we're working on that has to be healthy to access resources. So we have all these qualities kind of working for us. Now let's say that even despite all that, something gets inside of my corporate network on a Windows Active Directory join server. What are the ways that an organization can mitigate the lateral movement that then occurs within an organization? Like let's say that it was the last workstation in the organization, they somehow got off of that into the corporate environment, they started moving around. How do I mitigate that lateral movement that data centers have?
So there's a service that Microsoft provides called Azure Advanced Threat Protection.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do with that is if you have servers on your local infrastructure, which most organizations do, you install an agent on your domain controllers, and what that does is it monitors the environment for things just like that: lateral movement, passwords exposed in clear text within registry and other areas, and other things that are common for a security risk within the local infrastructure.
Yeah.
And by having that in place, you can have automated response taken for certain activities, and it can also integrate with the other services that we've talked about, like Defender ATP and Microsoft Cloud App Security, to ensure that those risks get locked down if they're identified.
So it's looking at what talks to what, and when things are talking to each other in ways they shouldn't, it's looking for opportunities to be able to change that threat profile and prevent them from communicating.
Yeah, so for example, if my account, the local Active Directory, was compromised, it was noticed that lateral movement was going on as a result of something with my account. With integration through Cloud App Security, we can say, okay, Tyler has access to all these different files that are shared with him. Okay, who are those files shared from? Right, how do we extrapolate that out? What actions need to be taken in order to make sure that this security risk gets contained?
Does it do that by understanding that authentications are happening and realizing that that level of authentication is suggestive of malware running through the environment? Or is it doing so by detecting sort of illegal operations on the server and that the server is doing something funny? Or is it both?
Both, yeah. It can detect a number of different things, and both of those are options there.
Got it. So in an environment where we have not yet done micro network segmentation and done a lot of sort of protections to prevent things from communicating with things, even deploying Defender, something like Defender ATP, would provide a measurable improvement in terms of what should communicate with what under the context of especially ransomware.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
So yeah, really the overall goal and the vision from Microsoft is protecting the devices themselves. Defender ATP is what you use. Protecting the local infrastructure is Azure ATP. Protecting your cloud apps and your cloud connected services, Microsoft Cloud App Security. And then that's all wrapped within the identity protection services that they offer as well.
Awesome. And then if you combine that with micro network segmentation or other protection, red forests, things that you're building around it. That's just other steps up.
Absolutely. Yep.
So we've talked about what really constitutes let's say legacy is probably the wrong word choice, but like a known network model. We have Windows Active Directory join machines now being communicated with Azure Active Directory join machines that are authenticated to with Azure identities. When you get to modern applications, applications which they're not running on Windows servers. It's a container app, right? It's a web app. It's using modern authentication services. It may even be an identity that's not tied to your Active Directory. Maybe it's an end customer, or it's a B2B scenario. Where do you see the identity layer in that space starting to fit in terms of like what can I do as an organization to protect the identity that is used for those custom apps?
So definitely a service that Microsoft offers in that space is called conditional access. So what you can use there is you can identify the different corporate applications that you have, your cloud apps, your different SaaS apps that you have available, and you can identify where, when, how users should be able to access those different applications. Are they on a device that's secure? Are they in a specific group of users? Not all users should be able to access all applications. Are they on a device that is enrolled with Intune or hybrid joined within the on-premise domain and cloud, Azure Active Directory? Do we want to protect their authentication session with cloud app security to prevent downloads? There's a bunch of different services or features within that tool that you can use to make sure that apps can only be accessed in the manner that you would like them to be.
Got it. And that's also probably a place where using things like Azure AD B2B or B2C can start to integrate some of those capabilities.
Yeah, so if you have B2B users enrolled into your environment or B2C, you can scope to those users as well. So you can say my B2B users, they're considered as guest users in your local tenant, where you would say, if it's a guest user in my tenant, require that any service that they have access to, they have to use multi-factor authentication. Or you can even require that they would have to be on a device that is enrolled within your Intune.
Got it. We talked about devices and identity and servers and serverless and so on. What about just information in and of itself? I've got a Word document. It has important information in it. I want to give it to somebody. I want them to access it, but I don't want them to give it to the neighbor, even if they work for the same company. What do you see as ways to provide additional protection in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, there's a really great service called Azure Information Protection. So what that does is it allows you to label documents or emails both in a manual or an automated fashion. And for the automated methodology for it, that's really where you get your value. So you can scope out different secure pieces of information that you would like to be identified. So personally identifiable information, social security numbers, credit card numbers, driver's license numbers, all kinds of different PII data. And apps that are integrated with Azure Information Protection, so your Office suite and such, if you're working on a document that contains that information, when you try to save it, it'll automatically put that label on the document. And what the label can do is it can restrict who has access to open it, if they have the ability to open it without a network connection, how long they have access to that document, so you can also expire access. So I can send you, a Word document that's relevant to you for a week, but after that week it's not relevant. So after that timeline, it can be expired, so you don't even have access to open it anymore. And you can restrict the ability to forward. So for the example that you gave, how do you prevent somebody that you gave the document to sending it to their neighbor? Restrict forwarding, or even just the protection on the device, or on the on the file rather. You would have that protection on it saying, only Nathan can access this file. Mm-hmm. So you could give it to somebody. You could put it on a flash drive, give it to somebody, and they can open it up on their home computer. Then all that they're going to see is log in with your corporate credentials that they don't have. So they would have nothing that they could even do with that document.
Awesome. Wow, that is a ton of information, and thank you for taking the time to share it. One last question for you. What makes you find the security practice, the security kind of effort, exciting? Why do you like working with the security kind of domain?
So really, what I like in general about doing what I do is having the ability to help people. And security is something that's on everybody's minds, especially with everything you see in the news about the different ransomware attacks that happen.
Yeah.
And if you can, as an individual or as a business, provide that assistance to somebody to make sure that they're secure and that they can feel comfortable working in their environment, I just enjoy that.
Great. Well, thanks for stopping by, Tyler. Cheers.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
And we'll see you next time on Concurrency Beer Theory.